They were considered invincible. The Roman army, feared throughout the ancient world, had conquered kingdoms, toppled dynasties, and expanded its borders without mercy. But there was one clash that shattered this aura of absolute power, a war against an African kingdom that dared to challenge Emperor Augustus himself. Few people know this story because it wasn't a Roman victory. It was a humiliation. A warrior queen led her people against the most well-trained legions on the planet and achieved what seemed impossible, defeating the Roman giant and forcing it to accept concessions that made history. What led Rome to such disgrace? How did an African power rise up against the greatest empire of the time and win? That's what you're about to discover now. Picture the scene. We're talking about an event that happened just 20 years before the Romans suffered their infamous defeat in the forests of Germania. That loss, known as the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, was so devastating that it crushed Emperor Augustus' dream of expanding the empire even further. But before that, he had already faced another serious problem: the clash with the African Kingdom of Kush. It all began in 30 BC. After his victory in the famous Battle of Actium, the young Octavian, who had not yet taken the name Augustus, marched into Egypt with his army. At that time, Cleopatra had just committed suicide, bringing the Ptolemaic dynasty to an end. The Egyptian throne was left vacant, and many believed Octavian would crown himself king. But he refused. Instead, he declared that Egypt would now become part of Rome. 3 years later, Octavian officially received the title of Emperor Augustus. Before we dive into the second topic, I'd like to ask you a small favor. Take a moment to check if you're already subscribed to the channel. This is super important because in the upcoming videos, we'll bring you a series of incredible content that will help you deeply understand the domains of the empire. And Egypt, with all its wealth and strategic importance, practically became his personal treasure. To protect this priceless jewel, Augustus decided to station 3 Roman legions in the territory, including the famous 3rd Cyrenaical Legion and the 22nd Dioteriana. That was his way of ensuring that no one would dare to interfere with the golden heart of the empire. Think of it this way. In 30 BC, Rome had around 15,000 soldiers guarding Egypt. Their main mission was basically twofold: maintain order within the country and patrol the southern frontier, where enemies could appear. Most of these soldiers were spread out in strategic locations like Thebes, the ancient capital, and Alexandria, the great city on the Mediterranean coast. If an invasion occurred, they were supposed to rush south and support the troops defending the border. But for Augustus, that wasn't enough. He feared one thing above all: civil war. To prevent anyone in Egypt from taking advantage of military power, he made a strict decision. All legions would answer directly to him, the supreme commander. No overly powerful generals allowed. And since Egypt was extremely rich and vital for the empire, it was from there that much of the grain feeding Rome came. Augustus needed someone he could absolutely trust. So he chose a close friend, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, and appointed him as the first Roman governor of Egypt. Unlike other governors who only handled administration, Gallus also had direct command of the legions stationed there. Just picture this story. Augustus appointed his friend Gaius Cornelius Gallus to govern Egypt, but it wasn't just any position. Besides handling administration, he also had direct control over 3 full Roman legions. Shortly after arriving, Gallus had to deal with a rebellion in the south, near the city of Syene, modern-day Aswan. Since Egypt had just changed rulers, many Egyptians were far from happy with Rome. But Gallus proved to be tough. He crushed the revolt and pushed even further south, crossing the first cataract of the Nile and seizing the fortress on the island of Philae. Excited by his victory, he ordered monuments to be built in his honor. And he didn't stop there. According to the historian Cassius Dio, he spread inscriptions all over Egypt, even on top of the pyramids, bragging about his achievements. Can you believe the audacity? Of course, this did not please Augustus. The emperor began to see him as a threat, especially because Gallus was also a cultured man, a famous poet, and admired by Rome's elite. The result: Augustus stripped him of everything. Ruined and fearful of what might happen, Gallus ended up taking his own life. In his place, Augustus chose someone more flexible, Aelius Gallus. But this new governor was unlucky. His first military campaign, the famous expedition to Arabia Felix in 25 BC, was a complete disaster. To make things worse, much of Egypt's garrison was pulled into this adventure, leaving the southern frontier exposed. Even with all this, the Romans still dreamed of the gold of Nubia and Africa's wealth. But they made a huge mistake. Aelius Gallus decided to impose taxes on lands that had always belonged to the Kingdom of Kush. That act enraged the Kushite queen, known as a Candace, a title that may have meant queen mother or regent. So, had you ever heard this incredible story, where an African queen and her people managed to humiliate the mighty Roman Empire? Tell us in the comments what surprised you the most about this battle, and whether you believe Rome really wasn't as invincible as it seemed. We want to know your opinion. This queen, named Amanirenas, was a feared warrior. In 24 BC, taking advantage of Egypt's weak defenses, she marched north with her army. The Kushites seized Philai, invaded Roman territories as far as Syene and Elephantine, and then withdrew carrying prisoners, treasures, and even enslaved Egyptians. As if that weren't enough, they carried out a powerful symbolic act. They cut off the head of a statue of Emperor Augustus and took it as a trophy. Centuries later, in 1910, that bronze head was discovered buried on the steps of a temple in Meroe, the capital of Kush. And here's the detail. It had been deliberately placed so that every visitor would be forced to step on the emperor's face. This was a historic victory for Kush, but the war was far from over. Augustus couldn't just let it pass. He sent a new governor, Petronius, who gathered more than 10,000 soldiers and marched against the Kushites. The clash took place at Suez, about 100 kilometers south of the First Cataract. But there was one problem. The Kushite army was gigantic, 3 times larger, with more than 30,000 men. It seemed impossible for Rome to win. Picture the scene. On one side, the Romans with around 10,000 infantry and 800 cavalry. On the other, the Kushites with an army 3 times larger, more than 30,000 warriors. It was like a small team going up against a giant. But then came into play what had always saved Rome: discipline and training. Governor Petronius did not give up, even under the suffocating heat and the massive sand dunes that made the march difficult. He pushed his troops further south, following the Nile River. Along the way, the Romans pulled off a brilliant move. They captured the city of Selches and took control of the navigable part of the river. This severely disrupted the enemy's plans. On top of that, the Romans had another advantage. Their weapons were far superior to the shields and spears of Kush. With this edge, they reached Napata, the ancient capital of Kush. Queen Amanirenas offered peace, but Petronius refused. Instead, he destroyed the city and enslaved hundreds of its inhabitants. However, the scorching heat, disease, and the unfamiliar terrain prevented him from advancing further. So he decided to retreat, leaving behind a Roman garrison to secure the territory. Back in Rome, he sent prisoners and trophies, as if declaring, "Honor has been restored." But the Kushites did not accept defeat. Now let's move on to the next topic. But before we do, I noticed you haven't hit the like button yet. That's super important because it helps YouTube keep recommending our videos to you. And that way we can continue bringing you content that will help you. So go ahead and click that like. It's free and it makes all the difference. Thank you. Queen Amanirenas came back with more allies and attacked once again. She managed to retake some positions, but she couldn't break through the Roman stronghold. Exhausted, both sides eventually turned to negotiations. In 21 BC, Petronius accepted a peace proposal and sent envoys to Augustus. The emperor, busy with diplomatic agreements in the east, decided to give in. He ordered the withdrawal of Roman troops from Nubia and even canceled the taxes that had enraged the Kushites. For Rome, Kush was too far away and not worth the effort. For Kush, it was proof that they would never bow down. The result was a stable frontier and profitable trade for both sides. But the most striking fact was this: an African queen and her people had humiliated the mighty Roman army. Afterward, they even toppled and decapitated statues of Augustus as a symbol of victory. Years later, Emperor Nero tried to plan another expedition deeper into Africa, sending the elite Praetorian Guard to explore the Nile. But his death and the civil wars that followed buried those plans. Rome would never again march against Kush. And in the end, this warrior kingdom showed the world that not even the greatest empire of its time could force it to kneel. It was a lesson in courage, resilience, and dignity that still echoes today. The greatest empire of the ancient world proved it was not untouchable. Faced with the courage of an African kingdom and the relentless leadership of a warrior queen, Rome was forced to retreat, negotiate, and accept conditions imposed by those they considered weaker. This was the victory of Kush, the defeat Rome tried to erase from memory, but one that still echoes today as a powerful reminder. Even giants are not invincible. And here's the big reflection. If even Rome, with all its disciplined legions and superior weapons, could be humiliated, how many other stories remain hidden in the forgotten pages of history? How many impossible victories have we yet to discover? If this content surprised you, hit the like button right now. It tells YouTube this video is worth recommending. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because we still have many forgotten battles to uncover. And let me know in the comments, would you like to learn about other Roman defeats that almost nobody talks about? See you in the next video.